breakout session on the future of AI and voice interaction in association with the Adapt Centre. Some of you may have heard Vincent Wade, the director of the Adapt Centre, just speaking on the main stage there. And we have with us to discuss these things Dr. Amelia Kelly, Director of Speech Technologies at Soapbox Labs. Soapbox Labs is a pioneering technology company specialising in the development of automated speech recognition for kids. Dr. Robert Ross, Senior Lecturer at TU Dublin School of Computer Science and a funded investigator at the Adapt Centre, and he's working in the areas of dialogue and text and image analytics. And we have Shane Lynn from EdgeTier, the Autonomous Contact Centre. EdgeTier's flagship product, Arthur, uses AI and machine learning to assist agents in contact centres. So just as the audience here is warming up, and we will invite your questions quite early on, so share them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on those. I just wanted to start off with a question of my own, just in relation to Vincent's talk. He spoke a lot about human-centric AI and this idea of a digital balanced society. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on those concepts yourselves. Don't be shy.
I'm happy to be in there if you like. So this is an area that I've always found very, on one hand, stressful, but interesting at the same time. When you work in an area like robotics or speech-based human-computer interaction, there is always that conflict of interests where we want to develop technology almost for the fun of it. You know, as scientists, as engineers, we have this drive to develop, create, push the technology to the next bounds. And if we're left alone and in our own bubble, it's very easy for us to keep pushing that without, and potentially lose sight of where the interaction between that technology and society can be. And over the last, I suppose, 10 years, we've seen a lot of the dangers that can be there in terms of when change at a national or an international level can influence society, and not always in bad ways. Like, arguably, if you look back at 2016 and the major changes that happened, some people might link that back to changes in industry and infrastructure that left people feeling disconnected, and in the world moving in particular political directions, which, depending on your perspective, may be good or bad, but definitely very different, very much a lot of impact. So I think as engineers and scientists, we have this great responsibility to make sure that the human is centric in this whole adaptation and movement forward in technology. And as we stand on that cusp, really, of the next, I see us standing on the cusp of the next generation of technology, where our hard-coded, engineered type solutions are already fantastic, and we've taken them to a great level. And we're now beginning to move into this next realm of systems that are learning and personalized to our needs and could do an awful lot more. And I think we have responsibilities as companies, as educators, to really look at how that fits in with society, how it fits in with the individual, and to have that individual-driven growth in the area. So I think it's an exciting time to be involved with technology, but we have to keep humans in that loop. And I suppose that's something that does maybe stress me even a little bit as we take our own research and technology forward.
And from the perspective of people running companies that are working with these technologies, would you guys agree, Shane and Amelia?
Sorry. Amelia, sorry, you go first.
No, you go ahead.
Ladies first, go on.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I just wanted to say, like, that by its very nature, the type of work that people are doing in engineering, like machine learning, it's all by its very nature very human-centered now, because of the reliance on large amounts of data in order to get it to work. Like, a lot of the algorithms we've been working with, they've been around for decades, but they just haven't been able to create anything that's very good for the user because we didn't have the large amounts of data required to actually get any use out of them. So now, by definition, if you take speech recognition, which is my field, the amount of data that companies like Google and Amazon have now, just by virtue of everybody having the Echo or whatever in their kitchen and talking to it every day, and all that data being collected. So, and also, like, you know, there's a lot of just from a company point of view, a lot of people using Scrum now in the office, and it's all very product centered, very user centered. What can we make for the client? How does it get better? So yeah, they're my thoughts. Go ahead now, Shane, sorry.
Yeah, no, I find this topic, the human centricity, kind of interesting. I think there's loads of ways to look at it, right? So for us, there's probably two aspects. One is we are going to contact centers, which are, you know, primarily human operated contact centers that are working at volume to help customers with issues. And when we do go to those conversations, there's a balance in that we are selling and we are working with the people who are running a contact center, and we are selling them software that is making the contact center more efficient. So there's a human centricity side around like employment issues and around like replacing people. And then on the other side, though, I sometimes find that fear and that what we come up against there is somewhat overblown, in that I think we're very, very far from AI completely replacing humans. And I thought that the talk on the main stage was actually quite good in recognizing AI augmentation as a way forward, just to increase efficiency. And the other side of the thing is that when you do go down, the more and more at the moment, what I've seen, the more and more you go down trying to completely automate things, you do lose customer satisfaction. And there's a range of companies out there that we work with, especially in customer service, where it depends which way their compass is facing. If they're facing in I want to drive down costs at all other cost, and I want to drive up efficiencies, and if I annoy customers, it doesn't matter if the contact is deflected. I didn't get an agent to do it. And then there's the other companies that are much more the other way, which are, no, what's top here is customer satisfaction and net promoter score, because that's how we differentiate our brand. And it's really interesting seeing the value of where their compass is in that kind of, I suppose, human centricity from a customer's perspective. It's do they want to go which side of the coin do they want to try and play with? And I think there's lots of different options there.
Yeah, it's some really interesting concepts you raised there. I mean, for me, the idea of the AI as an augmenter as opposed to a replacement for people, it has become really apparent in my own work recently. Just literally today, I'm praying for the YouTube translator caption bot to kick in so that I don't have to transcribe something in full. What we do is, for our captioning, we correct what the bot has already kind of produced for us. And the time saved in that, honestly, I can't tell you. Like it take me about half an hour to completely, with timestamps, transcribe maybe 2 minutes of material by myself. And I'm fascinated that I can do that, because I work with language and I know that language is so nuanced and so complicated, and there's a context and there's tone and stuff like that. And I'm amazed that these bots can do that. And while I first was afraid of what this could do, I'm now really impressed and also find it really useful, and I'm happy to work alongside them. Do you find that shift is starting to happen anywhere else with people that you're working with? Robert, maybe on the education side, are you seeing that is the way people are?
I wasn't going to say on the education side. I was going to say in working with other companies that we would tend to work with coming out of the Adapt Centre and elsewhere, where that idea of incorporating what people refer to, it's a strange term I always find, but robots and robotics into like business processes is something that's really changing the way a lot of even very high paid jobs are being done, because it's all about squeezing that little bit of efficiency out and trying to provide these little robots, or I suppose software agents, that are helping to automate lots of different tasks within even the office environment. And I suppose that's important. And again, it is important that those sorts of technologies are human driven, in that the creation of them is very much based on how people like to work. And in that context, yes, I am seeing that happen an awful lot more. I think there's a danger though, and I think this is a good point linking back to Shane there, that companies, and especially I use this term insultingly, I suppose, the bean counters can always there's the risk that they can assume the technology, even the augmentation technology, can do too much too fast and start cutting back then on the human involvement. And that's not what we want. We want to make sure that the human is given the tools, the skills to do things better, but not necessarily at the cost of cutting back the humans, because we can see how even in telcos around the world, particularly the Irish incumbent telco, there can be the risk of being seen to provide very bad service when they're just cutting back on the human side and hoping that the automated side can do more than it's ready to do already, ready to do more than it's capable of already.
I think Robert puts an interesting challenge to you there, Shane, because I mean, customer service, it's often a pain point for people, and some people would probably balk at the idea of that also being managed by maybe some bots and things like that. So how do you kind of overcome those barriers?
Yeah, so like this is a particular pain point for us. So I think there's a and kind of in your question as well, there's just this huge difference between what makes a headline and what revolutions are actually happening quietly behind the scenes, right? So in a lot of sales conversations that we have, we're actually pulling the client back from, you know, when is this system going to just learn what agents do and learn itself and get better? And we feel that question weekly. It's like, and when will the system start to learn and do better things? And I can see why people have this impression, but like, you know, back to your point, Amelia, like you need data and instructions to say this is what better is before any system is going to learn anything.
Yeah.
So the fundamental understanding of people who we're selling to with the technicalities of the system are massively disjointed. So we actually end up pulling people back from that brink and giving them a realistic view of what's possible. So I would say the headlines are AI is coming to take over the contact center. But actually, and that sounds very impressive. But actually then, like fundamentally, I think to what you brought up, Elaine, like the translation is a really good example of this. Where there are revolutions happening is in accuracy around speech analytics, around voice recognition, around translation. And they've had like fundamental changes to the business models of the companies we're working with. So like the best bits of AI I find are the ones that you don't really see and they're kind of non-invasive. So the two examples I would give are the predict ahead typing that Google does in your Gmail account. We implement a piece of that in our software that uses the vocabulary of the agents as they type. So it predicts just a few words ahead. And actually that's really effective because it's non-invasive. You're working on your computer and it's a helpful prompt that's not in your face and you can kind of just tab to complete your sentence. And if you don't use it, it's fine. But the technology and sophistication of that technology is huge behind the scenes. But to the user, it's like, oh yeah, it's just there. And it makes a big impact. And the same thing for translations. That translation accuracy, for our clients, we do live translations in chats as they happen. And agents can be talking to someone else in the world completely seamlessly. But it's like, sounds like a small change, but it has fundamentally changed their hiring processes, their staffing, the way they manage languages, just a step change overnight. Whereas that didn't make any headlines, you know?
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned that non-invasive aspect of it, because you do have to get the person on board with cooperating with this technology as well. And to do that, you do have to adopt certain techniques to try and get them to use that. And I am aware, and I'm sure you are, Amelia, of people being kind of afraid of the invasive nature possibly of this kind of like speech recognition technology in their homes. Some people are all for it and crazy to adopt it, and some people will be very skeptical. And with your work doing it with children, do you find you come up against some of that skepticism?
Absolutely. Well, dealing with kids' speech, you have to be extra sensitive about the privacy issues around it. Because at the end of the day, if you take a big company like Google or Amazon or any of those, their main business goal isn't to make speech recognition really good for you. It's to sell you stuff based on what they hear in your home. And, you know, you got to remember that if you're using a child's toy, for example, and it's hooked up to Amazon, they don't have any restrictions on what they hear. I mean, like if the neighbor's child comes into your house and uses it, they don't even have permission to have that data half the time, you know? So it's something you really have to be careful of. Like at Soapbox, we had this, we have it kind of built in. We've got like very, very sophisticated privacy protocols. And we also basically have a mission statement that we never use data for anything other than to make speech recognition better. We've no ulterior motive there. And I think this really plays out. Like you mentioned, there teachers in education. Like we do create speech technology, like fluency assessment technology, that allows teachers assess how well children are coming on in their reading progress. but also it allows teachers not have to be sitting down with every single student every single time they want to assess it. It allows children read on their own with the aid of speech technology, and the teacher just to, you know, check in on the dashboard and see how each child is doing and know when to intervene then and use their time a bit more judiciously. But like, that's all well and good for teaching where you need high accuracy and you need to like to save the data so the teacher can listen back to it. But if you take something like children's toys, for example, there is no reason in the world that the data, the voice data of a child talking to their teddy bear should be sent up to Amazon or Google. That shouldn't happen. The only reason it does right now is because it's very, very difficult to get all the advances in speech recognition and technology onto, like, for example, a microchip that would fit on a toy. And that's actually something that Soapbox Labs is working on now. We have a Disruptive Technologies Innovation Fund going on for the next 3 years, where we're looking at in collaboration with NUI Galway and Xperi. We are developing speech technology that works end to end and fits on a tiny microchip for the toy industry, essentially, so that basically there'll be an air gap between the child's toy and the cloud. There's no reason at all. Imagine the child can talk to the toy, have a natural interaction with the toy can talk back to the child, have a conversation with them, but none of that data will ever leave your home. No big company will ever get their hands on it. That's what we're working towards in Soapbox Labs at the moment.
It's very interesting. It's great to hear what you're working on for the future. I do have one more question of my own, and I see some questions coming in now from our visitors, so keep them coming and I'll come to them shortly. But my last question for you guys, from my own perspective, just based on what you were saying there, Amelia, I'm just thinking, this kind of environment that we're in now, where we've kind of been shunted into a digital transformation, somewhat unwillingly in some cases, have any of you seen other opportunities in that? Like, I mean, with education in terms of children's speech recognition, but both for Shane and for Robert, I'm sure this whole environment has kind of triggered some new innovations and ideas among all of you.
Yeah, I'm start there and hand over to Shane. I think from a very simplistic perspective, as a researcher, it's opened up the opportunity of gathering so much more data in a very nice, open and transparent way. But we have people interacting naturally in groups of 2, 3, 4, 7, 10 people, having online conversations. We have, in a lot of cases, people happily chatting away, having that conversation. We're capturing the video data of the person as they're interacting. This is true in sort of an academic perspective, where we're giving lectures, but also in team meetings, etc. So whereas before, a lot of us who are interested in what's called conversational analysis would have stayed well away from that sort of style of data, and really only maybe looked at meeting room environments, which was always pretty difficult to work with. Now suddenly we have the opportunity to collect so much information in a different way, and coming from university settings, we can potentially get classes and groups involved and willing to give over their data in that way. So that, to me, is pretty interesting, and how that can then lead into improving systems that can monitor and pay attention to the users, making sure that they're following along with conversations. That relates into education. We've got some PhD students looking at issues around, detecting confusion in the user when maybe they're not paying attention anymore. So there's lots of excitement, lots of opportunity there that I see. On the other hand, I tend to like to do a lot in human-robot interaction in the physical sense, and it's impossible to get data on that now anymore. So there's pros and cons, but yeah, there's definitely opportunities and different avenues I hadn't considered before.
Yeah, so for us, COVID's a mixed blessing. I will say the immediate impact was bad in that, like, contact centers are they're maybe a strange environment to people who aren't used to them. They're quite monitored. The staff are often quite, depending on the contact center, they're quite transient. People come in for the summer in a busy contact center, leave again. There's a lot of like in and out movement. There's a lot of monitoring. People's shifts are quite tightly monitored. So the shift to a remote culture was a much bigger challenge for them than it was, say, for us. So in our company, it was, okay, everyone needs to go home, bring your laptop. If you need to bring your screen, we'll send out keyboards. Whereas for them, it was, okay, there's phones on desks. No one has a laptop. No one has remote access. So for the first few months, all contact centers were just caught up in, how do we make this work? So that wasn't that much fun for a while. But actually then the longer term effects have been much faster adoption of digital technology, both by the contact centers themselves and also the customers who are contacting those centers. So a drive by companies to bring people to digital channels and use them has been a boon for us. And I would say a lot of the kind of innovations or things we're looking at are driven by the problems that have arisen from there. So I see one of the questions in the chat actually covers some of this around management and managing people and knowing what's going on. I think a lot of contact centers would work where there's a room, there's lots of people in them, there's large screens on a wall showing you what's going on, and there's red, amber, green flags going off in different places, and you can kind of get a feel for what's going on. The manager might be walking around the floor, talking to different staff members, getting a feel for like, how are we performing today? And from a management perspective, that's gone now because the manager is on their laptop at home, and there might be 100 employees out in their own spaces working away, and who has visibility of what's going on? How does he call down to different people? And building tools then that sit on top of that and can aggregate all that information neatly to those managers and to people who are administrating the contact center has been an area that's seen a jump for us, for sure.
And Amelia?
From our point of view, we have found that like companies or businesses with traditionally long sales cycles, like education, for example, are suddenly realizing what's been available to them all the time, and they're jumping on it. We have a product launched with in conjunction with Amplify, who are a very large digital ed tech company in the States, and they actually jumped a year early. We were commissioned with them to create a fluency demo and product for them by next August. And instead they kind of said, oh, actually we need it immediately. So, it was all hands on deck for us. And we see that once one company jumps, everybody else says, oh, well, if they're doing it, we need to do it too. So from our point of view, like from the educational side of things, like all this technology has been there, but people have always just been a bit tentative. And I think this comes back to the scare factor and the creep factor of, should we be giving our voice data over? Are we taking jobs off teachers, that kind of thing? And they're realizing that, no, actually, this technology is here to make the teacher's job easier. It's here to allow children practice in their home and not have to be in school or in different places. And underpinning all this is speech technology that works for children in environments where they actually want to use the product. They might be sitting in their homes while their TVs are on in the background, or the radio is on, or their parents are having conversations. And that's part of the challenge for us every day anyways, to make sure the speech technology we create is working in all those environments so that we can help these industries.
I know, Shane, you kind of addressed Denny Cawley's question from the chat there, but just so the others might get an opportunity to see if there's anything they want to chip in on it. Denny's interested in the intersection of AI and management/leadership education. And it strikes me that we do hear a lot about how AI might help with, really some of the more tedious of tasks a lot of the time. But are there opportunities there in terms of leadership and management and those kind of higher concept and more kind of nuanced kind of roles? Robert, you look like
it's an interesting one. Something I've thought about a lot in terms of the impact of AI at different levels of well, I suppose initially I thought about it as the jobs market, different types of tasks. And it's funny, so many people assume that AI will have impact only on, and I don't mean to use this word in an insulting way, but it's the menial tasks in life, and that's where AI impacts and replaces things. But I've become very cynical on that in a way recently, in that if you look at the cost of AI and certain types of technologies, particularly as we go towards the higher end, companies are starting to see that cheap human resources are cheap, and actually where they're spending lots of money is on the most educated or the highest powered decision makers within an organization. And they're actually beginning to ask us questions in terms of how we can facilitate providing assistance at the highest levels to different, what would be well-paid positions. Now, from a positive perspective, you can say that's great, because it's saying, how can AI maybe provide decision support systems, typical analytics type tools that can support the managerial, the leadership process in being more efficient. That's a very positive spin on that. But then the little cynic in me also sees a negative side on it, on how that can so easily be said to start to devalue some of those higher value roles and taking away from them. So certainly I do see that intersection between AI and leadership and management. I'm starting to see it in the types of work that we're doing. And it's something I see as both exciting, but as I say, a little bit worrying at the back of my head as well.
Do you think robots might going to take your job?
Yeah, only if you're paying enough, though,
Although I would probably counter that a little bit by saying that as you move up the stack from repetitive work to managerial and directorship type work, you're also typically changing. You're changing from IQ to EQ, and that emotional intelligence side of things, and the bits that make human interaction. And it's probably close to us in that, like, for us, customer service, the bits that make customer service good are the inherently human parts, right? And it's like the stuff we take for granted as humans is like, empathy, humor, negotiation, debate. They're the bits that, like, when you have a good customer experience interaction or a good manager, they're the bits that those people embody and are great at. But they're actually fundamentally the hardest bits for computers to emulate. Like, and I think, if you read some stuff around, like, some paradoxes around how we look at machines and what they can do the things that we think are hard. So multiplying two large numbers in our head for us is really, really difficult, but for a computer is really, really hard. And so we tend to think that they can do the more complex things that we take for granted. So for granted, we take, I can look at your face and know if you're listening to my conversation and thinking it's funny or serious or I'm off my head. Completely intuitively. And I take that for granted. Whereas the things we take for granted are the most difficult things for robots to actually manage. So I would probably take a lighter note and say, maybe AI can kind of help managerial in kind of alerting or spotting anomalies or analytics and that kind of stuff, but actually delivering management type decisions and human to human interaction, I think we're a good bit off.
Yeah, I got to come back on that one a bit, because I do think time frame is relevant there. If you looked 10 years ago, the research we were doing was on basic dialogue state tracking, was on basic dialogue planning, putting Markov processes to work to get the basic infrastructure of the types of technologies we work with moving. We don't get funding for doing that anymore. We get funding and we have the students working on things like detecting the emotion in our interlocutors as we're working with them. We get the funding for expressing emotion back to the users and tracking all of that nice stuff. Now, it might be still in the research lab at a very early stage, but if we look at that sort of 10-year time horizon, certainly not in current products, but we look further in the lab, that's where things are going at the moment. So I'm not saying that will work, but we just have to acknowledge that what's being done at the lab now is starting to address all those questions of the EQ, of the acceptability of our partners in dialogue, etc.
It's an interesting point that actually leads into Lucy Campbell's question, which is, can we teach the machines about empathy, or do we keep that for ourselves? I would be on the side of let's keep that for ourselves. I mean, I have faith in the researchers, but what's the point? We could be good at that side, can't we?
Very true.
I really liked your point, Shane, about kind of like a computer can see what we see as a complex task and do that simply, but then what we do kind of intuitively, a computer would really struggle with. What I think strikes me, it kind of fits in with that, is that we're at a point where we've talked about AI for a really, really long time. I mean, I got sci-fi films by AI when I was younger, and I'm sure a generation before me did as well. And we're at the point where we can really use this technology now, and it can do fascinating, magical things. But I think the public idea of AI is still that kind of fantastical sci-fi version where it kind of does too much and maybe is a bit fantastical. But what it actually is some amazing nuts and bolts kind of things like computational efficiency and a really great support of technology. Do we kind of need to reframe how people see AI? It's more of this kind of like, it is quite a boring tool. It's probably not even sexy, but my God, is it useful?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I actually think most people are using AI consistently in their daily life, but they carry around a phone and not thinking about it. And they're still like, when will AI arrive? Alexa, play Spotify,
you know. I think there's room left for one more tiny little paradigm shift where I think we're still kind of a bit stuck in the past of using tools with our hands a bit. So everything we do when we're logging into Zoom and we're doing all these different things, there's still a lot of moving and clicking and mouse pads. And I think we're going to get to the point, like people are interacting with their voices a lot more now. And while I don't see a day where it will all be voice forever, I can definitely imagine a place not too far in the future where you can walk into a room, you can look at your laptop and say, oh, here, open Zoom there and mute Slack and go to that and open it up. And it will be able to take in all these streams of information. You can look at your light and say, turn on. It will take your gesture, it will take your eye gaze, it will take your voice, and it will obey it. Like at the moment, I put on Spotify, and then I spent another 3 minutes trying to hook it up to my Sonos, and then I put on Spotify Kids and it won't connect through my iPhone. Like all that needs to just go out the window. And I think we have that technology for these multimodal style interactions. And I think once we kind of just let it go, all the stuff we use our hands for and we have our heads buried in the screen for, I think we'll be moving along towards this situation where AI is solving little problems for everybody at every sphere.
That's a really great point that we'll have to unfortunately end it on. We've actually gone a few minutes over. It's just such a fascinating conversation. I lost track of time myself. And thank you so much, Amelia, Shane, and Robert, for talking to us today. And if anybody has any further questions, you can always try and contact the guys on one of many functions on Hopin, which is a great tool that I'm really impressed with as well. And just thank you all, and thanks to all of our attendees as well. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks, guys.